Okay, let's get started with our segment on environmental law. You might wonder, has the environment always been an issue in American politics and in American society? By no means. Even though so many products today are advertised as being green and pro-environmental, and it's hard to find anybody, well, you couldn't find anybody who's anti-environmental today. Nonetheless, prior to 1970, it wasn't that people were for or against the environment. The environment simply wasn't a political or societal issue. In fact, that's why the first Earth Day was invented, April 22nd, 1970. Now, who was celebrating the first Earth Day? Hippies. Hippies were swinging and swaying on the Presidio in San Francisco, singing to Mother Earth. But today, in the 21st century, who takes out full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal, color ads to celebrate Earth Day? Well, BP does, and Exxon does, and General Electric does, the very people the hippies were demonstrating against. So, environment has become universally popular. One thing I want to point out is that in the United States, we have a representative republic, and important issues in our representative republic are debated by Congress and the state legislatures, and important issues are societal and political issues. And certainly environmental issues are important, and they are, like all of our big issues, societal and political issues. Now, when I first started to teach this course, a friend of mine who had taught some environmental law at Tulane came to me and said, well, have you discussed with your students the environmental law of unexpected consequences? I said, no, I haven't, and as soon as you tell me what it is, I'll teach my students. And he did tell me. He said, just like in many areas of life, the environment and environmental law has a law of unexpected consequences. He told me that you do anything to the environment today, it could be good, it could be bad, and 100 years later, there are going to be unexpected consequences. There's a good fun video on this concerning the Ranger Lady and Smokey the Bear. Okay, let's go to the federal acts about the environment. The granddaddy of them all is the National Environmental Policy Act. It was passed in 1969. It does three things. It establishes a three-member Council on Environmental Quality. That's an actual council of three people. They meet in Washington, D.C., and they advise the President of the United States on environmental matters. Second, whenever there is a significant sized project that involves the use of federal money, that project, before it begins construction, must submit to the EPA an environmental impact statement. If that environmental impact statement is not approved by the EPA, that project, federally funded project, cannot go forward. It doesn't have to just be a federal project, but a federally funded project. Also, that act creates the Environmental Protection Agency, which is, of course, the federal regulatory agency concerning the environment. Let's talk about the Clean Air Act. Everyone, of course, wants clean air. One of the elements is a state implementation plan. Every state, every so often, gets from the feds a plan to clean up the air in that state. Kind of sadly, perhaps, the feds don't offer money to implement that plan, and often there's a dance between the feds and the state people about, well, we'd like to clean up our air too, but we just don't have the money, and this just goes on time after time, and without any money, often these state implementation plans don't get implemented. Also under the Clean Air Act is the PSD or PSDA, standing for Prevention of Significant Deterioration Areas. You might be aware that air, for instance, in parts of New Jersey is very dirty, and almost all of Arizona is extremely clean. There are clean air states, especially the big western states, and there are dirty air states. They tend to be the industrial states. And even Congress realized that we can't have the same air quality standard in both types of states. So to keep the clean air states having clean air, Congress has enacted the Prevention of Significant Deterioration Area regulations. There's also a non-attainment area. In a non-attainment area, your particular area or your city or your county has such polluted air that the only way you can create a new factory in that county is to buy an existing factory, close it down, and only pollute as much in your new factory as the old factory used to. We've got the Clean Water Act. It's got point sources of pollution, which are factories that are pointed in one location. We've got non-point sources, which is agricultural overflow of insecticides and so on. Now, let me point out that the EPA has never said there can never be any pollution. The job of the EPA is to regulate and lessen pollution. I don't think we could ever eliminate all pollution. Another federal act is FIFRA, F-I-F-R-A, which stands for Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So if you've got rodents of unusual size around you, your solution would be to buy a product that has been approved under FIFRA. There's a Toxic Substances Control Act, which is a comprehensive scheme for regulating toxic chemicals and other substances. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of 1976. The EPA is in charge of regulating the generation, transmission, and disposal of hazardous waste under this act. There is the Superfund. Under the Superfund, originally, way back when the EPA was young, it identified about 200 sites around the country that were more or less hopelessly polluted through generations and generations and generations. Imagine you had a lead plant in, let's just pick Nebraska, and that lead plant had been pouring raw liquid lead 24/7 for 125 years into the fields around the plant. Well, those fields may be so polluted that extra money is needed to clean up that area, or these 200 areas. And so the Superfund, or CERCLA, C-E-R-C-L-A, was created. And under CERCLA, there's a tax put on all businesses in the United States with over $2 million in income. That there's also a tax put on companies dealing in petroleum products or chemical food stocks, and all these taxes are put together and put into a fund, and that fund is designated just to clean up, let's say, these 200 hopelessly polluted sites. I did see a story on the news